Thank you. I am calling to order the October 6th meeting of the Historic and Environmental Preservation Board. I would ask everyone to please repeat with me the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And now I will read a statement from the chair. Pursuant to Executive Order number 20-150 issued by the Office of Governor Ron DeSantis on June 23, 2020, which extended Executive Order number 20-69, municipalities may conduct meetings of their governing boards without specific location and by utilizing communications media technology, such as telephonic or video conferencing, as provided by Section 120.54(5) Florida statutes. Members of the Historic and Environmental Preservation Board are appearing remotely for this meeting. Procedures for public comment will be explained by the city attorney shortly. And Madam City Attorney, please state the procedures to be followed during this meeting and tell us about lobbying.
Yes, Chair, thank you. I did want to note for the record that the last executive order issued by the governor of the state of Florida extending Executive Order 20-69 was Executive Order 20-246 issued on September 30th, 2020 to allow for the virtual quorum. Any person who is a lobbyist pursuant to Chapter 2 of Article 6 of the City Code must register with the city clerk and comply with related city requirements for lobbyists before appearing before the Historic and Environmental Preservation Board. A person may not lobby a city official, board member, or staff member until registering. A copy of the applicable code section is available in the city clerk's office or online at municode.com. Any person making a presentation, formal request, or petition to the board concerning real property must make disclosures required by the city code in writing. A copy of this city code section is available at the office of the city clerk or online at municode.com. The agenda and the materials for each item on the agenda for this virtual meeting was published and made available to the board members in advance of the meeting. The materials for each item on the agenda are available during hours at the city clerk's office and online 24 hours a day at miamigov.com. Any person may be heard by the board through the chair and pursuant to the published notice for not more than 2 minutes on any proposition before the board unless modified by the chair. Since this is a virtual meeting as authorized by the governor of the state of Florida, members of the public wishing to provide public comment may do so by uploading a pre-recorded video or voice message, pre-register for a callback to provide live public comment, submit a public comment via the city's public comment form, or provide live public comment at City Hall. I'll provide more details in a moment, and more details can be found at miamigov.com/virtualboards. All comments submitted will be included as part of the public record for the virtual meeting and will be considered by the board prior to taking any action. The city will accommodate speakers in person at City Hall, subject to all emergency measures in place to prevent the spread of COVID-19 and subject to screening for COVID-19 symptoms. Any person exhibiting any symptoms will not be permitted to enter City Hall. All interested parties are required to abide by all state, county, and local emergency orders and are urged to remain at home and practice social distancing. If a proposition is rescheduled, the opportunity to be heard may be at such board acts on the proposition. When addressing the board, the members of the public must first state his or her name, address, and what item will be spoken on. When the board takes action or votes on a proposition, it shall do so by vote to be recorded and included in the record. Anyone wishing to appeal a decision by the board for any matter considered at this meeting may need a verbatim record of the item. A video of this meeting may be requested at the Office of Communications or viewed online at miamigov.com. Please silence all cell phones and other noise-making devices. Any person with a disability requiring assistance, auxiliary aids, or services for this meeting may notify the hearing board's liaison. Please note that board members may have generally been briefed by city staff on items on today's agenda. Items shall proceed in accordance with emergency ordinances number 13902, 13903, and 13914. Pursuant to emergency ordinance number 13903, parties, including the applicant, appellant, appellee, and any person recognized by the decision-making body as a qualified intervener, as well as the applicant's representatives and any experts testifying, may either make arrangements with hearing boards to be physically present at City Hall, to be sworn in by oath or affirmation, or may appear virtually and make their own arrangements to be sworn in person at their location by an individual qualified to perform such duty. Also, pursuant to that ordinance, members of the general public are not required to be sworn in by oath or affirmation. Pursuant to ordinance number 13914, city staff may be sworn in by hearing board staff or the city clerk remotely by audio-video communication technology from a location within the state of Florida, provided city staff can be positively identified. The members of the board shall disclose any ex parte communications to remove the presumption of prejudice pursuant to Florida Statute Section 286.0115. Staff will then briefly present each item to be heard. Regarding access and public comment accommodations. For access, the City of Miami is using Zoom to hold its October 6, 2020 Historic and Environmental Preservation Board meeting. Zoom is a cloud platform for video and audio conferencing, collaboration, chat, and webinars across mobile devices, desktops, telephones, and room systems. In order to ensure that the public has the ability to view the meeting, the city's communications department will broadcast the meeting through all the usual channels and avenues that are provided when a Historic and Environmental Preservation Board is fully held at City Hall. The meeting can be viewed live on Miami TV at miamigov.com/TV and on Comcast Channel 77 for those residents within the city. The broadcast will have captioning. The meeting will also be on YouTube. And additionally, the city selected a virtual platform that does not require the public to purchase or download any additional software or equipment to watch the meeting. Aside from the Zoom platform and that the participants will be appearing remotely, the public will have no discernible difference in their ability to watch the meeting. As for public comment, the city has developed several new methods of ensuring public comment for a virtual meeting. It established 4 new options. The first new option allows the public to provide public comments via the city's dedicated public comment voicemail by calling 305-250-5343. I'm sorry, that was 305-250-5343, where individuals will leave a 2-minute message that will be played during the virtual meeting. The second new option allows for the public to submit a 2-minute video to be played during the virtual meeting. The third new option allows the public to submit comments via an online comment form. Comments submitted through the comment form were distributed to the board members and city administration throughout the day so that board members can consider them prior to taking any action. Additionally, the online comment form will remain open during the meeting to accept comments and distribute to the board members up until the chair closes public comment. The fourth new option allows the public to pre-register online or by calling 305-250-5344 to provide live public comment by phone during the virtual board meeting. For all of these 4 new options, all comments received will be included in the public record of the meeting. The city created a simple set of instructions explaining how the public may submit their comments. Those instructions were provided in the notice and published online at miamigov.com/virtualboards. Additionally, like any other Historic and Environmental Preservation Board meeting, the public may provide public comment at City Hall. As previously mentioned, all speakers desiring to appear in person will be subject to all applicable emergency measures in place to prevent the further spread of COVID-19 and be subject to screening for symptoms of COVID-19. Any person exhibiting symptoms will not be permitted to enter City Hall, but can participate through the remote options described. These 5 public comment options established and provided for the Historic and Environmental Preservation Board comply with Section 286.0114 and Section 120.54 of the Florida statutes. The city published an agenda as well as included in the notice to the public the items and topics that will be discussed at this virtual meeting. Additionally, the public has been given the opportunity to provide public comment during the meeting and within reasonable proximity and time before the meeting. Moreover, Section 286.0114, subsection 4C of the Florida statute specifically authorizes the city to prescribe procedures or forms for an individual to use in order to inform the board or commission of a desire to be heard, to indicate his or her support, opposition, or neutrality on a position. The city, through its 5 public comment options, has provided 5 different procedures and forms. The city provided information on how to submit comments in the notice of the public and on a dedicated web page. Board members, are you comfortable with all of the notice provisions and uniform rules of procedure we've established for this virtual meeting?
Yes.
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 That's all I have, Chair.
Thank you. Let's take this opportunity to swear everyone in at City Hall and remotely.
Can we start with staff?
Yes, please.
Can you raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
And now go to City Hall.
Yeah, there's someone here to get sworn in. I'll be right back.
Can the attendees please raise their hand if you have a notary there with you to be sworn in? And we'll go through one by one.
Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
We have 9 attendees. These are the applicants. Only 2 of them have their hand raised at the moment. I'm not sure if they all have notaries there or not. Can you see them to go through them, Beatrice?
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm gonna let them in right now so they can get sworn in on camera.
You guys hear us?
Okay, I believe all the applicants are in.
Okay, applicants, you want to swear in?
I believe we need to go through them one at a time, Beatrice, yes?
Yeah,
Rebecca Saberi, can you go first, please?
Sure.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you affirm that the statements that you are about to attest to are true to the best of your knowledge?
I do.
I do.
Okay, Mr. Prossoff, do you have a notary there with you? Unmute yourself, please, and you can be sworn in.
Hello.
Okay. Okay.
Do you need her notary seal or anything?
No, she just has to swear you in.
Okay. So you want her to stay here, or
She can swear you in now, and then
Swear
she
me in?
can.
do you know how to swear me in? She's never done it.
So you are a notary, correct?
I am.
Okay, perfect. So the typical language is, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Okay.
You have to say that.
You want to say that to him and he'll say yes.
Okay. Do you swear to tell the truth, nothing? I'm sorry. Say it again.
Oh my God.
The truth
I swear to tell the
The
truth,
whole
the whole
truth,
truth, and nothing but
and
the
nothing
truth.
but the truth.
Yes.
Yes, I do. Yes,
Annabella Gosky.
is that good?
That's fine. She asked you the question and you said yes, right?
Correct. Thanks, Amber.
And when you're not speaking, please mute your microphone. Excuse you, Todd.
Oh, finally, I saw you.
I think Mr. Adams froze.
I think so too.
Annabella,
Yes,
you want to get sworn in?
I'm alone and I'm not speaking.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Thank
Anybody else?
Christina?
Hi, I'm the architect for the Severi residence. I'm gonna swear in the designer. I'm also the notary. I'm gonna swear in the designer of the project, and she's gonna speak on behalf of the owners. Jess?
You need to turn your camera on. There you go.
Raise your right hand, please. Hi. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Brian?
If you're not speaking, please mute.
I think there's a little bit of an echo in the lobby from the other computer.
Well, I think that's all.
Okay. We'll assume that everyone has been sworn in and we'll start with a roll call, please.
Mr. Andrade? Mr. Campbell?
Here.
Mr. Colley?
Here.
Ms. Galvez Tudros?
Here.
Ms. Odell?
Here.
Mr. Prieto y Munoz?
Here.
Mr. Ryan?
Present.
Mr. Trachtenberg?
Here.
Mr. Tragash?
Here.
And Chair Hopper?
Here.
And we have quorum.
We good, Julie?
Yes.
Okay. Were there any requests for absence?
No, I didn't receive any.
Okay.
question. Beatriz, I have the architect and the contractor for Axor holding, and they wanted to know if you can accept them.
For what?
The architect and the contractor for Arthur Porosov, they are trying to get into the meeting and they can't. They want to know if you can accept them.
They are in the meeting.
Thank you.
Okay.
Did we get any minutes with our agenda?
Yes.
Any additions or corrections to those minutes? Did anyone have a chance to look them over?
I was not able to download the file because it is ginormous. For some reason, it kept getting stuck. So I'm not.
Would you like to defer the approval of the minutes till next meeting?
if possible.
Is there any objection? Okay, we'll put off the approval of the minutes until next meeting. We'll do two at once. Okay, I think we're ready to start with the discussion items and monthly updates. Mr.
No discussion items at the moment. I will try and bring the Historic Preservation Grant funding to you next month. There's something in it I want to check with the department heads before I bring it to the board. Board member Galvez Churros did ask for an update on the Little Havana House at 1016 Southwest 13th Court. I received an email from Code Compliance. The property has 2 open cases, one from building for being an unsafe structure and another one from code. The case has been referred and is accruing a lien of, I believe it is $250 a day. So it looks as if there are 2 outstanding open cases on the structure.
I am aware that house, at least it was on the market for sale. Is that what you gather, Denise?
Yes, and I've actually spoken to the seller, and they intend to sit on it and let it get destroyed. They don't care.
Yeah.
So that's why I wanted to find out if anything we could.
Yeah, no, it sounds like
when they bought it in 2017 was not.
No, I knew. Well, I knew the previous owners, and the house, they bought it and doubled the price and haven't done anything to it as far as the sale price right now. So, doesn't seem like good intentions on that one.
Definitely not. So I don't know if there's anything else we can do besides continuing to find them.
I mean, there will come a point where it becomes a dangerous structure, and then there's really not a lot that we or the board can do. All I can do is keep, I suppose, speaking with code to try and keep the pressure on them. But it does appear to be potentially demolition by neglect. Yes.
I've been inside of it with someone that was looking to buy it, maybe 3-4 months ago, and it was fine on the inside. The outside looks awful because the wood siding, and I drive by it probably every other day. It's right in my neighborhood, and the wood siding and the tree litter. I don't know what that counts for, but
I suppose the problem is if the price that is being asked is too high and they're now accruing liens. If this is a case of no one purchases it, does it just continue to deteriorate? I suppose is the.
Or I guess the intention is that the liens and the fines become a bargaining chip. But if she bought it, or sorry, the person bought it, and it's been sitting there rotting for 2 years, 3 years now, it's obviously intentional, and doubling the price or whatever, untouchable price. But then, if that becomes the case, then you're selling a lot, basically a big lot for that price. I don't know if that market's there, if it's even our business to think about that. But
I can keep speaking with code to see if there's any.
So from what I'm understanding, there's nothing else we can do, right, Mr. Adams?
Not that I'm aware of. Maybe the city attorney can.
Okay. Wow.
So under our demolition by neglect provisions, First and foremost is code enforcement. We can explore the possibility of some sort of civil injunction. There is a provision for that to try to get the court to provide a court order to bring it up to code. And, if they don't, it could become just another lien on the property similar to our code enforcement liens. But that is something that we can explore if it's such a serious case. And I can, in between this meeting and the next, I can touch base with Warren and get some more of the details, and then touch base with our litigation team to see if this is an appropriate case to bring some sort of civil action.
Be great.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Anything else?
That's all the updates, unless the board have any questions on anything.
I have one small question. I know we had spoken a little bit about this earlier when we were talking about Morningside Park, but the seawall is composed of some of the remains of the Halcyon Hotel that was torn down to make a DuPont building. Is there any way, and the city is looking to redo the seawall, is there any way we can encourage them to reuse or protect those materials?
I can certainly reach out to them, encourage them to do that. Whether they would be reused in the seawall or not, I don't know. I suppose that depends on the extent of the repairs. The park itself, as you know, was not designated as a historic site. Well, it was, and it was appealed, so it wouldn't automatically come to the board. So the best I could do is reach out and see if they could possibly be used elsewhere if they are to be removed.
Thanks.
If not in the seawall, those materials are very significant in Miami history. The Halcyon Hotel was on the site of where the DuPont building is right now, but previously to that, they were quarried from the area 8th Street underneath where the Metro Rail is. You can see these limestone cuts that are like 8 feet tall, and there was a limestone quarry around there, and they were responsible. So it's something that, as primitive as blocks of limestone are, it dates back to 120 years ago.
Sure. Maybe they could be used elsewhere in the park or something.
Yeah, they make modern art out of everything. They're pieces of the Orange Bowl sign, replications. But I missed the beginning of the previous meeting in September, so maybe you covered it. But I know we mentioned prior about the archway for the Seaboard Airline Railroad Station. Was there any update on that?
I still haven't heard anything from the county. I can reach out to them again and find out if their plans are still moving forward, or, I mean, one option is to potentially designate it, but I don't know if that's, I mean, is it significant enough to be designated?
I think it is. I mean, it's not really
saved.
Yeah, and it's not really in the way of anything that's going to be built on that property because it's on the sidewalk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I was riding my bike up Biscayne the other day, and I saw one of the old structures that we allowed to build something behind it, and it's a combination. That's what it should be: is a combination of old and new, where it applies.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely doesn't interfere with the building or the site. I mean, it's within likely the front setback. Mm-hmm. So it's not as if there's going to be any building there anyway if the site's being redeveloped. I can reach out to county again and see exactly what their plans are, if they're still moving ahead, and discuss it further with them.
Okay.
Thanks. Anything else? If not, we'll move into the public hearing, and the staff will introduce each item. First thing we'll start with, and the applicant will give their name and address for the record. The staff will read the staff report, and the applicant will have chance to respond to it, and then we'll have public input, and then when everyone has had a chance to speak, close the public hearing and open it up to the board for questions or comments. And I believe we're ready for number one.
Mr. Chair, just to let you know, we didn't receive any public comments for any items.
Whoops. And maybe we'll have an even shorter meeting.
Yeah, and then the public comment online, did you want to close it now or do you want to leave it open?
We can leave it open. I don't think we'll be here as long as usual.
Okay. Have item number 1, file ID 7346, a resolution of the Miami Historic and Environmental Preservation Board pursuant to section 23-6.24 of the City Code of Ordinances, approving or denying a special certificate of appropriateness for new construction and site improvements to a non-contributing property located approximately at 4424 Northeast 2nd Avenue, Miami, Florida 33137 within the Buena Vista East Historic District.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Is the applicant present?
Let's see.
Who is the
Is
applicant?
it for Powell? Powell, the applicant is for Building Center number 3. Can the applicant be unmuted from City Hall?
Hello.
Oh, there we go.
Hi.
Please give your name and address for the record.
So my name is Pavel Hanusovsky from Building Center number 3, and the address in question is 4424 Northeast 2nd Avenue.
Thank you, and we'll start with the staff report.
The applicant is requesting a special certificate to allow for new construction and site improvements to a non-contributing property. The subject plot is currently vacant. The new construction is intended to be a single-story commercial structure. The proposed site improvements include a paved parking area, a two-way driveway, and landscaping. The proposed ground floor plan drawing indicates a building lot coverage of 1,113 square feet on non-pervious areas of 1,865 square feet. The non-pervious area supports a two-way driveway, 1 handicap parking space, and 3 regular parking spaces, and a back entrance to a commercial structure. A non-pervious area of 53 square feet is intended as the main entrance. The proposed commercial structure is of an L-shaped form at the northeast corner of the property with a 10-foot setback on 2nd Avenue and Northeast 45th Street. The structure is a one-story of 998 square feet of habitable space, which includes 1 accessible bathroom. The main entrance is located on the east elevation facing 2nd Avenue. The elevation drawing illustrates a continuous 2-foot parapet. The provided rendering also illustrates a parapet with an empty and flat roof. The fenestration is to be a 7-foot high shop front glazing located on northeast elevations. Architectural details for the structures, type of construction, wall type, and roof assembly are not provided within this application. The materials that have been selected and included within the application includes the shop front glazing with mullions of aluminum painted in anodic clear with clear low E double insulated glass and an exterior wall color to be of snowbound. Proposed floor plan suggests that the existing 4-foot chain link fence is to be retained. A new fence might be desired for an appropriate new construction scheme. Location of the CU is proposed with the property and should not be visible from the public view. All mechanical equipment to be screened from the public view. Within the special certificate of appropriateness application, the applicant has not provided the image or graphics for the existing signage. Further information is required for the existing signage, which includes details, specifications, and manufacturer's brochure or color photograph of the proposed signage. The City of Miami Code of Ordinance, Chapter 23, Historic Preservation, requires a COA for this application. And the following: the form, the proposed new construction and site improvements takes advantage of its corner lot property. The L-shaped structure increases commercial square footage, visibility with its high shop front glazing. Its paving, parking area, and two-way driveway provides vehicular accessibility. The spacing. The proposed 10-foot setbacks meet the minimum requirement for the property for a T4 general urban zone. The proposed fenestration of high shop front glazing contains equal panel widths across the north and east. The height. At 1 story in height, the proposed structure is consistent with the Buena Vista East residential area. In yards, the aerial view of Buena Vista Historic East District shows the single-family residents have a higher percentage of lot area devoted to green space than the current proposal of the subject property to be of paved parking area. However, this property faces 2nd Avenue, where similar properties facing the street have been converted from residential to commercial. Materials. The use of fenestration and painted exterior walls can be supported. This is consistent with the existing historic structure of the district. Applicant is to confirm if the exterior is to be concrete with smooth stucco. Color. The proposed colors are consistent with the existing structure and the district. Rhythm, pattern of windows and door openings have been aligned to create the shopfront, with continuously ties all the glazing together and creates a modern architectural feel. The proposed new construction and site improvement to a non-contributing property for a commercial program of retail is appropriate for the existing vacant lot due to the property's future land use designation of restricted commercial. As a property facing 2nd Avenue and located in the Buena Vista East Historic District, the proposed commercial structure is cohesively located within a transactional zone between commercial and residential. The single-story structure retains residential height and shopfront windows for commercial visibility. The findings are consistent. Shall I read the recommendations? Okay. Pursuant to Section 23-6.2B4, the City of Miami Code of Ordinance is amended with the Secretary of Interior standards. The Preservation Office recommends approval with conditions of the Special Certificate of Appropriateness. 1. The site shall be developed in accordance with the plans as prepared by Building Center Number 3, submitted as part of application PZ 1919-64. Number 2. All windows and door glass shall be clear with option of low E. Number 3. The applicant shall confirm the roof height for the new structure to be in accordance with appropriate zoning demarcated in all the elements. 4. The applicant shall confirm if the exterior is to be concrete and smooth stucco. 5. The applicant shall consider the installation of landscape surfaces to be more consistent with the historic district, such as concrete slabs or concrete pavers. The applicant shall submit specifications and details along with color manufacturer's brochure and color photographs of those paving materials. Number 6, the applicant shall consider new fencing for the property instead of retaining its existing 4-foot chain link fence. If new fence is proposed, the materials and details of specification shall be provided. Number 7, the applicant shall submit specification and details along with color manufacturer's brochure for the proposed signage, fencing, walls, street screens, or staff for review. Number 8, a current survey shall be submitted to reflect its current status of vacant lot and determine existence, location, and dimensions of street, screen, barrier, or signage. Number 9, the resolution shall be included with the master permit set. 10, the applicant shall comply with the preliminary zoning review and HEP review. 11, the applicant shall comply with the applicable requirements of Miami 21 Code, Chapter 2317, and City of Miami Code of Ordinance. Number 12, the applicant shall comply with the requirements of all applicable department agencies as part of City of Miami building permit submittal processes.
Thank you. Is there anything you would like to add to the staff report?
Not at this moment.
Is there anything the applicant would like to add to the staff report?
I would just like to clarify or maybe ask a question for additional clarification. The existing chain link fence that's to remain, that's actually in between the properties. Is that something else that we should include? The new proposed wall at the, that's going to be the east and the north side, but the chain link is actually in between the adjacent properties.
Do we know who owns the chain link fence?
I actually do believe that is our the same client. He does have an adjacent property near that area. I don't think it's both. It's actually Brian James. If you could chime in.
Yes, the same ownership. We own the fence also.
Please give your name and address for the record.
Sorry, Brian James, 700 Northeast 69th Street, Miami, Florida.
Sir, Mr. James, were you sworn in?
I was not.
Okay, just a reminder that in order to speak on an item, people need to be sworn in. So Beatrice, could you, if somebody is on here that isn't sworn in for this item, can we make sure in the beginning, we ask if anybody needs to be sworn in for these items? Do you have a notary with you, Mr. James?
I do not.
Okay. Okay, let's just for each item, let's ask everybody if they need to be sworn in. If they're not going to be speaking and they're not sworn in, they really shouldn't be available on here.
Did you get the answer to your question?
I did. So I just wanted to know, if that's something that we should replace as far as this project is concerned, or if that should be taken care of within the other properties because it is an adjacent or a fence that's along property line, not
If I may add, chain link fence are not allowed in historic districts. If this is a full site improvement project, the fencing should be considered. Warren, would you like to chime in?
I don't think there's anything that says we can insist that you remove it if it's not part of the application, but it's certainly something that could be considered and potentially could be made a condition by the board. So really the application now is open for board consideration, and the board will clarify the conditions as recommended by staff. And if you have any questions, then you can obviously ask address the board members.
Okay, understood.
And I think condition number 6 says only if a new fence is proposed, you have to take it down.
Okay, understood. Okay, so in the area, understood. Okay.
Okay, we'll close the public hearing and open up for discussion and questions for the board.
I have a question. There's discussion about how this building, which seems very, very basic, albeit modern, addresses issues or character of the neighborhood. And three things that I observe of the neighborhood are the commercial buildings have eyebrows over the windows. The ones that are in the corners have a curved facade that makes the turn of the corner, and they have knee walls where the storefront is. And I would like to hear from the applicant if he considered any of those elements or anything else.
We have considered them. What we wanted to do is, start with a basic form and move forward. If that's something that you would like for us to take a look at even further and include it, we could certainly work with either Wendy or somebody else from the HPP board to incorporate those items. We could certainly add a radius. What the issue with the radius or limiting this amount of square footage with the property that we're proposing or the building structure that we're proposing is that the site is already very limited as far as how much square feet we can add because of the parking. So we wanted to maximize the building itself. So we would certainly consider an eyebrow to include it and stylistically to expand what's happening in the neighborhood. But I would certainly like to continue with the approved notion and then include it as a comment that we could work with Wendy or somebody else from HEPP to include that in there.
I think we should add that as another condition.
Andy, just one other quick. I'm looking at the, I guess it's the perspective that was done.
Yes.
And I see, other than the one tree in this right of way, there's no trees, there's no vegetation. from the sidewalk up to the building. I see it on the side street, but on Northeast Second, except for what I'm seeing here, the one tree cut out in the right of way.
Correct.
That's it.
That's the, so there is an existing, so what we didn't want to propose, we didn't want to propose additional openings within the sidewalk. We've included the street in a location that was existing. There's an existing placement for a tree and there's no longer a tree there. And that's the tree we're proposing. If you take a look at, I'll tell you right now. We have a tree disposition and a proposed tree plan on HEP 19. That's the page 19 of the proposal. We're basically showing all the new trees that are being added, and you could see there the existing cutout at the concrete.
Okay. All right, and maybe Chris, you could address this if that's sufficient. And one of the things that I've always felt is the most contextual you can do is whatever is proposed in the streets, within the street. Is there a tree that's recommended by the planning and zoning for the right of way? But those are my comments.
I guess, thanks, Mr. Tragash. I guess based on that, this is Chris. I have a few comments as well. Is that okay, Mr. Chair? Okay. Thanks very much for the plans. This is to the architect. I have a couple quick questions. Follows up with Mr. Tragash's statements. With regards to the streetscape, the city redid the streetscape along Northeast 2nd Avenue a few years ago. So the existing planter opening that you're referring to there, I think was part of that streetscape work. And I guess for whatever reason, there is only one planter there in the streetscape. But on the landscape plans that you guys have now, I think you're calling it out as an existing planter, but I don't believe there's any reference to replacing that tree that should be there for the city of Miami's streetscape. So I think it was, that'd be a very easy thing to do. Obviously, if it was an X tree, you put an X tree back for the streetscape design. But with that said, following up on the idea of the landscape for this property, I noticed a couple of things. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with the simple design and layout, especially landscapes. If they can get complicated, they don't necessarily perform well over time. But in this particular case, there's a couple things going on. I guess there's a very large mahogany tree, it looks like, on the property that you guys are proposing for removal. And it says it's in poor condition. The Environmental Resources Department is going to require that you guys document that with an arborist report and some other things, obviously. So assuming it was in very poor condition, they didn't ask you to relocate the tree, which is what usually happens, then just to make up for that one tree, that one particular tree, you're going to be required to put, I did some quick calculations, either 8 12-foot height trees or 4 16-foot height trees. Okay. So with that said, you're proposing right now, I think three trees on the property. There's quite a few plans here and there. It's a little bit hard to decipher based on graphics, but in a nutshell, what I'm going to say is that currently on the north side of the property, you're proposing 2 very small trees, silver buttonwood trees, which are native. I think that it would behoove the project in the neighborhood, which is very lush and it's very, it's got a nice diversity of species. There's a big poinciana across the street. I think that you probably are going to have to consider replacing those silver buttonwoods with something larger. A larger canopy tree, could be even a mahogany to replace the ones that you're proposing to remove. And that makes 2. And then on the Northeast 2nd side, it's still very open. right? You're proposing one tree. Now, I understand it's a storefront, you'd like views to that. But no matter what, just to meet the code and just to meet the mitigation requirements, you're going to have to add additional trees on this property just to meet the requirements. And I think it's going to be beneficial. So I think you can do that simply. I think you should use larger canopy trees on the north, and I think you should treat the east side along Northeast 2nd Avenue, even though you're not modifying the existing streetscape. There's a lot of things that you could do in that big, large landscape area that you have between the sidewalk and your new proposed building that wouldn't block any views to the architecture, wouldn't block any views to the proposed use, but would do a number of things. They would act as your street trees. They would reduce the heat and the glare that's going to be pounding on that side of the building all throughout the day. That's, you know, not the easiest thing to deal with. So I think that has to be looked at. And then one more kind of macro comment along the west side of the property, you know, where you guys are like, oh, do we have to replace the chain link fence? I mean, typically you do have to replace a fence in a situation like this when you're doing a property like that. But I noticed in this particular case, there's nothing proposed there in any type of screening at all along that property line. Now, I heard that the client and the owner of the property maybe owns the adjacent property. So I'm sure you guys know the conditions really well there. But usually, you know, you would want to provide screening along that property line to separate this use from the adjacent residential use. And you would typically do that with native shrubs and small trees as well. And I know it sounds like I'm making a lot of comments, but they're really quite concise. I'm trying to provide as much information as possible that is helpful. The final comment I'll make is that reference to the perspective. And right now you guys just have a big lawn area going from the sidewalk to the architecture. Again, simple is no problem and is great, but you definitely need to break up at least adjacent to the building, and in some areas, some ground cover plantings and simple planting design so that you don't look like you have a totally suburban building, just totally out of context with the area. And all of these things that I'm mentioning, none of these things are cost prohibitive or anything like that. They're just refinements to what you're already proposing. So those are my thoughts so far. If you have any questions, obviously I'm happy to weigh in. Thank you.
Okay, I have
a comment.
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
Najib,
No,
go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, Mr. Tordesia, were you about to ask a question based upon Mr. Collins' comments? Okay, I'll have some comments myself. Mr. Tordesia, are you an architect? You're from the...
The name is from the computer here in the lobby. My name is Pavel.
Okay, sorry. Are you the architect or working with the architect?
Well, from the architecture's office. So yes, the architect.
Okay. I want to elaborate on both the comments that were just made by Mr. Tregash and Mr. Cawley. To me, the comments of Mr. Cawley about having the amount of glazing you have on your east facade and no proposed landscaping, I'm just surprised at that. That's why I asked if you were an architect. I'm not sure. And I have some other comments, but I have one question for you. A lot of the other buildings, especially on the west side of Northeast 2nd Avenue, as we go from south to north, are zero lot line to the sidewalk. Is there a reason why you did not think of making your building similar to zero lot line to the sidewalk? Because the setback from the sidewalk creates that green swale and that suburban looking lot placement that Mr. Cawley just commented on that is out of context with this neighborhood. That is.
So to answer the question, we were simply following what was mandated by code, which was the 10-foot setback.
Okay.
On that street. We would certainly consider it had that not been placed. But
okay.
The existing building was within the property, and we basically maintained the setbacks as insisted by the code.
Okay, so you are not able to go zero to the sidewalk.
Correct. We were not.
Okay. That satisfied one question. Okay. Going now to Mr. Tregash's comments about the treatment of the building being in an historic district. Simple and basic has been, those words have been thrown around since we started commenting on this project. And your client may have been frugal with you, and I sympathize because I'm an architect myself. But I think the basicness and simplicity of this building placed within this historic district, I'm asking you, was this a frugality issue placed upon you by your client, or you were this is your view of how to design in an historic district? Because I don't see any effort beyond a wall of glazing and 4 white walls. And I mean, the things that Traeger spoke about, like the eyebrows and those other things. I just think there's a higher level of performance that you could have achieved being in an historic district. Like, there wasn't any consideration that you are actually in an historic district. But like I said, it could have been a frugality issue with your clientele. But do you have anything to say about that?
Well, as previously mentioned during the previous comment, we're very happy to take a look at how we could incorporate a little bit more of elements that speak to the neighborhood. We basically wanted a clean slate for a tenant to be able to add their own touch to this neighborhood. But
you're in a historic district, so I know you are open to things we're going to say. But I'm asking, just as an architect, as a designer, what did you consider when you knew that you're going to place this kind of project in a historic district? Was there anything you considered within your own mind? Did you consider anything? I'm very interested.
Of course we did. The main driving of where the design kind of went was due to the constraints between parking. Now, as far as it touching back into the residential area, there's a couple of projects that don't necessarily speak to what's been there. But like I said, the existing building, I think we're improving on what was there previously. And additionally, we are willing to work with the HPB to add a little bit more of that neighborhood touch to the project. So the considerations were there. Some of them were cost prohibitive. We wanted to keep as much as we could. Obviously, building a new building instead of repairing what was there, there's a bit of a cost already included. So we wanted to minimize as much of that as possible. But before, we're willing to work with the board to add a bit of a neighborhood flair to the building.
Okay, so you are willing to add eyebrows and any other things.
And we're open to changing the window size, adding a little bit of a knee wall, if that's something that we would prefer. I think we also wanted to, because we were set back from the sidewalk, we wanted to open up the windows so at least the storefront can kind of be the more inviting feature, since we're not right at the sidewalk. If there is a consideration, maybe we'd be willing to actually push the building up to the front. But I think as it stands, we're willing to work with the way that we have already presented it, adding some historical features that kind of mimic what's going on in the neighborhood, and we're also willing to change the heights of the storefronts to accommodate a knee wall, and basically tie it back to the neighborhood.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Trachtenberg.
Yes. So what is the intention? Maybe you don't know, but what is the intention to do with the property?
Well, at the moment, it's basically the intent is to have a commercial space. Now, the client has not had anyone that's willing to jump in there just yet. I don't know if they know exactly where they want this lot and their adjacent lots to stand. So the building is a little generic because there was no intent as of who's occupying that space as of yet. I think that's something that they're still trying to figure out from the market and where it stands as of now. And with the fact that we're once this is approved, you know, we will have to submit drawings to the city, and all these items will be addressed as far as the landscaping and the details of how all of this is put together, and those ornate items as well. You know, I think once that process is done, the design will be more complete than what's seen here.
Right. I mean, I asked because I'm not too familiar with the rights that are currently on the property. I mean, it is a T4 property, which is a duplex zoning, but I'm sure that there are grandfathered in rights, so for commercial use. Assuming that all goes through the city and it works out well, I would suggest that you do attempt to get a waiver for the setback because of the size of the property and the fact that it's within a historic district. Maybe there's something you can do to gain some space there, because there is something that was brought up earlier about that corner condition. I think this is a very important corner. There's only a few of them as you go down that strip, so creating a celebration at that corner I think is necessary. I get you only have 1,000 square feet to play with, so chamfering or curving that glass is very sacrificial. It's a large percentage of your space.
Yeah, and the other issue with that, Prasad, sorry to interrupt, is also that visibility triangle that we were asked to incorporate at the edge of the property, which is that 25 feet. So, you know, a lot of those things kind of play with how much space can we really gain from the slot to make it viable, to even, you know, build anything on there. So I think the 1,000 square feet is still kind of small, because it's double that for parking. So, you know, we try to do our best. I think if we do have to push the building up front, then, you know, chamfering that edge might help.
It will, and I think that's something that I would suggest you try to do, and also to create the effect of adhering to the aesthetic of the neighborhood. I would definitely do an eyebrow, whether that eyebrow comes to a point or it chamfers or it curves. I leave that up to you as the architect, but I would definitely try to create an important moment at that corner. Which brings up my next question: is why do you put the door at that point as opposed to anywhere else on the property, since there is no set program?
Well, so there is a door from the parking lot side that leads you into the building as well.
Right, but I'm talking about on the public facing side.
Right. So for the public facing side, we wanted a door that's actually facing the main street, the main thoroughfare there. I don't foresee that changing. But what we wanted.
So my suggestion would be is if you could create that chamfer in that corner, I would make that be the entrance point. So it celebrates the corner even more so, and it creates a reason for the canopy and celebration of that canopy, which is now the eyebrow that maintains its aesthetics of the neighborhood. That also frees up a bit of your usable square feet, because the way you're designing that space, you're sacrificing a lot of usable space upon entry. So if you shifted it to the corner, you're actually gaining more leasable space. That's what I have to say about that part. The next question I have is, you're doing a flat roof parapet, and looking at your drawings, to me, it looks like you're bringing the water internally. So I mean, this is, it's not so much about aesthetics, but it's more just a question as an architect to an architect. How are you discharging that water? Well, where's that water going?
Well, the water's more than likely going to end up in a swale. We'll either have to create something along the west side, where basically we bring the drainage underneath or in between the ceiling and the joists, and we'll bring that to the west side of the building. One, so that it's not on either side.
So it'll all be concealed within the package of the roof, and then into
that's the intention.
Outgoing. Okay, I just want to make sure there weren't any scuppers or anything like that with the roof.
No. Well, I do believe we may have to add emergency drainage. We could also incorporate that within the roof itself.
Right.
If we do incorporate any of those items, we're going to try to keep them off of the right of way.
Okay. Yeah, that was my question. I think that's an important point, just to make sure that your discharge points are happening in the back and not towards the front.
Yeah, we would not
right. And then my last statement about public-facing areas. This is a very strange kind of zoning because of its relationship to a main street and then what's happening across the street. So we have to kind of give a little bit of respect to the neighbors. Across the street is actually a single family home neighborhood. So just in of that, I would suggest that you do a knee-high wall so that you're reducing the amount of light pollution in the evenings, especially, so that you're not disturbing the people who live there in the evening. It also allows for a aesthetical, just like Mr. Treyguys mentioned, aesthetical reference to the neighborhood. So my points are, just to kind of recap: knee-high wall, absolutely. Doing an eyebrow and trying to celebrate that corner, whether it be just within the eyebrow itself or within making a chamfer and shifting the door. But I leave that up to you and your client.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, I didn't know where the city. Was there any input from Buena Vista Association? Their opinion of this?
Isabel, was any letter received from the homeowners?
Yeah.
No.
No.
Okay. Well, I mean, that being the case, I mean, I look at it like this: it's a vacant lot, non-contributing vacant lot. The applicant has come with, you know, with a very simple structure, and I understand the visibility triangle issues, and it's an uphill battle, so you have to deal with that. But I think a very minimal compared to what we get. There's no 2 stories with a rooftop bar overlooking a neighborhood. So this is very, in my opinion, a very non-controversial application, and they followed the guidelines from the city code, where the setbacks and whatnot. So I understand the issues. You know, maybe it's too simple. Maybe it needs a little bit of design. But I think as far as recommending to go up to the sidewalk, that's kind of like the opposite of what we normally do as far as the setbacks go. And it's with the landscaping, I definitely understand, but I don't see a problem with what they've proposed. I mean, I don't think it's our business to redesign it unless it's blatantly in opposition.
Oh, and I think to clarify, Hugh or Mr. Ryan, is that maybe they don't go towards all the way to the sidewalk, but maybe they gain a little bit of the setback, so it's not fully the 10 feet. So they can gain a little bit of square foot, so that they can end up, you know, creating a more pronounced entry on the corner edge. You know, maybe there's a middle ground or something.
And I would like to comment on the issue of the setback and why the setback. If you look at the other properties as you go all the way up to even 51st, I live in this area, so I'm very familiar. The 0 lot line setback, if you look at the example photographs where the block where the Mandolin restaurant is, the 0 setback is to, first of all, to celebrate the corner, as Mr. Trachtenberg mentioned, the ability to celebrate the corner is when you pull the building to 0 lot line, to create that corner, that chamfered corner for the entry. You see this in many buildings along the street. Also, it creates a feeling of a room on the street without the building being set back, because a pedestrian-oriented neighborhood, and that was the reason why. So the historic cultural not guidelines, but the historic cultural design features of having the buildings pulled in. This is a standard feature of traditional neighborhoods built before the war, before World War II. And this neighborhood celebrates it. And to have the building come to the corner and chamfer allows that celebration to take place. And it's the opposite of what might happen somewhere else in the city, but in these older neighborhoods, it's actually what is happening. And you see it all around the area, not only on Northeast 2nd Avenue, but on North Miami also, and many commercial streets in the area. And it will also gain few more parking in the back, which is something you said you needed and you commented on. So that's the reason why I am very interested in seeing, well, first of all, if the code really did limit you or say it's a 10-foot setback, and being Miami 21, I wouldn't see why they would not allow, based upon the precedent of the rest of the street, for the building to not come to 0. And I'm very much for the building coming at least closer to the sidewalk, if not on zero itself. I think it's a very important aspect of completing the rest of the scape of the street.
Well, on that point, Mr. Campbell, and you know, like I said, I've had to deal with the visibility triangle and what it allows. I'm sure the buildings that are up to the sidewalk, there was a visibility triangle when they built them. So if it is in a historic neighborhood, would that allow that triangle to be waived? That requirement of 25 feet or whatever it is, which
Well, the chamfer of the corner actually would be the visibility triangle. So if it's chamfered, then you have a clear view as you're making your turn or looking around the corner.
But the landscaping can only be 2 feet high.
Right.
I'm not crazy
in that triangle.
Yeah, but you can still have trees.
Yeah,
yes.
but dwarf trees like bonsai.
No. The point of the site triangle is obviously so that you can see somebody walking down the sidewalk. So right, you wouldn't have a tall hedge there to block somebody's view. But on the side of Northeast 45th Street there, you can still have a couple of trees as you're approaching the corner. You know, I wasn't suggesting anything that would be in a site triangle, put it that way, whether the building is chamfered on the corner and moves or not. So.
Right.
Chair, if I may add, if I can have everyone's attention to the staff analysis, in regards to the setbacks, there is a historic photograph where the original property did have a large setback. So this new proposal actually matches the footprint, similar to what was originally there, if that's something that you would want to consider.
Question, when you were referencing what was originally there, was that a commercial or residential building?
It was a commercial building.
Well, to be clear, it was originally a residential building that became a commercial building, right?
Correct.
What page is that on?
Sorry?
On the second page of the staff analysis.
I'm looking at the historic photo. It looks like a duplex.
Yes, that's what it was.
Are we ready
for this building to have been? Well, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
The point of the previous building, that building may have not been is that the original building that was built when this lot was created? Because I'm thinking that building could have been built with a setback with the same issues that we're talking about now, which could have been at the corner if they really wanted to. And another thing is, did the board approve the demolishing of this structure? But
we have on record that the non-contributing structure was noted as unsafe structure on February 3rd, 2016.
Okay, so non-contributing means it could definitely have been built in the 70s and also went away from the culture of the zero lot line, which the other buildings have established on the street. So the fact that the former building did not have a zero, to me, in this case, shouldn't weigh against coming to zero in this time for this project.
Do we have a date on that building? Because it looks like it's from 39 to me.
I can see on I see on the background it says 1945.
Okay, that's where do you see that?
Packet page 10. Background. The non-contributing structure was built in 1945.
Not the background of the picture. In the background.
Yes,
section.
The background. Exactly, background section.
Okay. Are we ready for a motion? And does that motion want to contain 3 more conditions relating to architectural details, screening along the west property line, and landscaping possibly in the front.
Yes, I can try to do this. If that's okay with you, Dr. Hopper?
That's great.
All right. I'd like to make a motion that item number 1, project address location of 4424 Northeast 2nd Avenue, be approved with the staff's recommendations as read in to the record, including 3 additional. 1 being that it includes a knee-high wall and an eyebrow. Whether the eyebrow is chamfered or curved is up to the architect and staff's approval to create a more celebration of the corner. Number 2, that should the applicant be approved to move the building closer to the lot line, that they create a chamfer within the corner of the structure. And 3, to include more vegetation on the public right of way to soften the edge of the structure.
I will second that one with a question for you, Jordan.
Yes. For these applicant to have accomplished these things, is this going to be with staff, or do they come back to us to see that they have accomplished these things with a new set of drawings? I would say that they're simple enough that I don't know that it would need to come back, and it could be approved at staff level to save time and effort. What do you think?
Okay, I second that.
So there's a motion, a second, and you had 3 conditions, 1 relating to eyebrow and knee wall, 1 about if it was moved towards the sidewalk, and the other one was screening or landscaping in general?
Yes, and when we go into discussion, I leave it to somebody else, to maybe Chris, to add to the landscape item if he deems it necessary.
Well, I guess I can.
On the motion?
Do you guys want me to say something about the landscape to help clarify that, or?
Yes.
Okay, to provide additional native canopy trees along the north and along the east sides of the property, and to break up the large massing of lawn with low shrubs and ground covers, so it doesn't have such a suburban feel, and to provide additional landscape screening along the western property line and the existing fence to help separate this property from the adjacent neighborhood.
And do you accept those?
Yes.
Ajit?
Yes.
Okay, great. Any other discussion on the motion? Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Trachtenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Colley,
Yes.
Mr. Campbell,
Yes.
Mr. Andrade. Oh, sorry, he's out. Ms. Galvez Turros. You're muted.
Yes.
Ms. Odell,
Yes.
Mr. Prieto y Munoz,
Yes.
Mr. Ryan,
Yes.
Mr. Tragash,
Yes.
and Dr. Hopper.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously, and this decision is final unless appealed to hearing boards within 15 days.
Thank you very much.
Here, just before we move on from this item, if the applicant is intending to possibly request a waiver to relocate the building closer to the sidewalk, should we have something on the record that that request would be supported by the Preservation Board so that you can include that in his request?
Yes.
Yes.
Amber, would that just be an agreement or a resolution, or just on the record saying that they would support such a request?
Request, well, I'm sorry, what was the request for?
If the applicant is going to request a reduction in setbacks, it would probably help if you had something on the record from the Preservation Board supporting that request. Should that be done just by the board agreeing to that, or should there be any sort of resolution or?
I mean, in order to submit something physically to the Office of Zoning, it should be a resolution. I think that we could add some sort, it wouldn't be a condition, right? But we can add some sort of whereas clause into this resolution that, this board either recommends or has no objection to the applicant's request for is it a front setback waiver?
Yes.
We can include that as a whereas clause. That might be the best
Right.
avenue.
And to clarify, if they do get the setback reduction, only then they can accept that reduction with a chamfered corner.
Yes.
So in other words, we won't accept a reduction unless the corner is celebrated through a chamfer.
Right, so that can be written into the whereas clause, and I know it's also a condition of this resolution. So we can put that in both places so that it's clear, because it may be submitted to zoning and they might not see that condition there, and but we can put that if that's how the board wants it to read.
That would be great.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, item number 2.
File ID 7898, a resolution of the Miami Historic and Environmental Preservation Board pursuant to section 23-6.24 of the City Code of Ordinances, approving or denying a special certificate of appropriateness for alterations to a contributing property located approximately at 7501 Northeast 4th Court, Miami, Florida 33138, within the Palm Grove Historic District.
And is the applicant present?
Good afternoon.
Please give your name and address for the record.
Beverly Beecham, 7501 Northeast 4th Court, Miami, Florida.
I believe he needs to be sworn in.
Yes, ma'am. Raise my right hand.
Give her a second, she's coming out.
Can you stay with me? Yeah. I am.
You raise your right hand.
Yeah.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we'll start with the staff report.
Reading the staff report into record. The applicant is proposing to re-roof the structure's hip roof with new asphalt shingles of true definition duration singles in Sashta white. The original roofing was material indicated on the tax card shown is concrete tile. The structure is originally built in 1956 and currently has asphalt shingles. The applicant has submitted a letter claiming the experience of financial economic hardship and cannot afford the cost of re-roofing to the original historic roofing material of cement tile. The roofing had previously changed to the existing shingle since they purchased the property, and the replacement request is in kind to what is in place. The applicant has also provided a notarized hardship letter with estimates between asphalt and shingles and cement tile from 3 different roofing companies: All American Roofing, Roof Tech, and Perkins Roofing. From the provided estimates, the applicant can potentially save an average of $15,146. The property is noted to have other necessary repairs to be completed in addition to the roof. The letter also states the property owner has experienced a dramatic decrease in income since retirement in 2015. The Preservation, Chapter 23 of the Code states that where strict enforcement of the provisions of this section would result in an unreasonable or due economic hardship to the applicant, the board shall have the power to vary or modify the provision in this section, including adopted guidelines. The fact that the compliance would result in some increase in cost shall be considered unreasonable or undue economic hardship if the use of the property is still economically viable. The findings are inconsistent. Pursuant to Section 23-6.2 of the City of Miami Code of Ordinances, as amended of the Secretary of Interior Standards, the Preservation Office recommends denial of the special certificate of appropriateness. However, the board may consider the stated economic hardship claim and the proposed alterations and approve the special certificate of appropriateness. I would also like to make note to the board that we received via email a PDF of a full financial hardship notarized letter stating the required documentation. Shall I also read this into the record?
Yes, please.
Okay. The letter is written from Beverly B. Beckham, the applicant, to City of Miami Planning and Zoning Department Preservation Office. Within this letter, the financial hardship is for the roof replacement for PZ 194312. The affidavit includes 1. Date of purchase made on November 1st, 2001 for the purchase price of $97,000. Purchase from Ivanhoe Alman, description of relationship. Number 2, assessed value of land and improvements for the last 3 years from 2020, $210,565 from 2019, $193,740 from 2018, $178,519. Number 3, property taxes for the past 3 years from 2019, $4,873 from 2018, $4,709 from 2017, $4,070. Number 4, no appraisals have been requested at this time. Number 5, no listings of the property for sale or rent have been made. Number 6, profit and loss statements are attached within this document. Number 7, no considerations by the applicant for as to use or adaptive uses for the property. And on the second page, there is a listed gross income of $26,400 and business expenses for the property management, $2,640, landscaping, $780, utilities expenses, $1,600, repairs expensive, $1,000, maintenance, $500. Mortgage, $21,600. Total operating expense, $28,120. The profit or loss from business is $1,720.
Okay, thank you. Does the applicant have anything to add to the staff report?
No, sir. No.
Okay. Is there any public comment on this item?
No, there's not.
Okay, then I'll close the public hearing and open up to the board for questions or comments.
Mr. Chair, we've had this before, and I think we've asked for certain things to be provided to us that the applicant has provided. The roofing comparison quotes, brand new concrete tile roof versus the asphalt. And, I've said it before and I'll say it now, keeping the structure dry, giving a dry roof. These roofs, these asphalt shingle roofs last 15, 20 years at the most. On the next go round, maybe it'll be a concrete roof, but I think we should dry it in and grant the hardship.
Anybody else?
Yes, I have a comment.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Once again, the economic hardship situation comes before us. And there are like Mr. Ryan just mentioned, there are documentations that are required to determine economic hardship. And I'm wondering, maybe this question is for Warren. Can the staff use this documentation to determine eligibility for economic hardship before coming to us? Or is the documentation provided to be given to us to determine the economic hardship?
My understanding of the code, and I can look it up, is that it specifically says that the board determine economic hardship. Let me just quickly find in fact, the section was included in the staff analysis. It says where strict enforcement of the provisions of this section would result in an unreasonable or undue economic hardship to the applicant, the board shall have the power to vary or modify the provisions of this section, including adopted guidelines. So while staff are recommending denial, my understanding of this section is because staff reviews applications based on the guidelines. This specific section in the code allows the board to make the determination and modify the provisions of Chapter 23 and the guidelines. So that is my understanding of the code. So the staff recommendation of denial is based on the guidelines, but the board has the ability to review the submitted information. And if they feel there's an economic hardship, they have the power to modify the provisions of the guidelines.
Okay, thanks. That was very clear.
Okay, so I pass by this this complex every day, multiple times, sometimes in a day, and you know, in the Palm Grove neighborhood, there's a lot of people who are living in their dwellings that may have economic hardship that they come before the board and ask for that. This is a income-producing property in a neighborhood that is increasing in value daily because of the historic nature of the community. This is right on Northeast 4th Court. A lot of people are passing by, and I think it's in my opinion, a eyesore on the way in which the tenants are dealing with the front yard and the sidewalk conditions, and how the landlord, I understand the landlord is in retirement, but how the landlord has maintained or did not maintain the integrity of the structure, nor the updating of certain aspects of the building. I think when it's an income-producing property, there are many ways to produce financial incomes, whether through increasing rent slightly to be what the neighborhood requires, to keep up with the needs of the building and the tenants, so that the roof doesn't leak, and the tenants, you know, have a place and dry, safe and dry place to stay. There are ways of getting loans and things for income-producing properties. So, with that said, as a contrast to Mr. Ryan's point, I support him completely on that statement. However, this is an income-producing property. It's not someone's dwelling or a homestead. So it's hard for me to get behind the idea of supporting a hardship when there are so many opportunities and ways to produce income off of this property and to improve the neighborhood like everybody else is, or most people are doing.
I have a question for the property owner. To Mr. Trachtenberg's point, I just looked at the property tax roll and it is homesteaded. So does the owner live on the property?
Yes.
Okay. And so some of the units are being rented out?
Yes, sir.
How many units are there, and how many are rented versus how many are occupied by the owner?
4 units are there, 3 are rented.
Okay, so you live in one of the units and 3 of them are rented out.
Yes, sir.
Understood. Thank you.
And I can tell you, as a historic contractor and a landlord, I own places. It's very hard to keep up with the taxes and insurance. I mean, you can't jack up the rents to pay for things because it's hard to keep up with the government and the insurance. I'm not sure if you have flood insurance there, but it's not that simple.
Any other questions or comments?
This is Chris. May I ask a quick question, please?
Sure.
I may have missed it at the very beginning, but what is the cost difference between the asphalt shingles and the other concrete roof tiles in this particular case? How much money would be saved by using the asphalt shingles?
It's about 15, I think, on average, right?
Yes, there's an average of 15,000 between the 3 other options instead of shingles.
Well, how much are the shingles? I mean, how much additional is it for the concrete roof tiles?
$15,000.
Okay, $15,000. And how long has the property, been had these rental units inside of it. Because I do understand what Mr. Trachtenberg is saying. There's a difference if it's your own personal residence, and in this case, it sounds like it's a gray area where it's partially personal residence and then partially also income-producing property. But I do think there is a difference between just one property, your own personal house, if you can't afford to, based on the emergency it's happening now with COVID-19, obviously, especially. I understand the difference between that, but if it's a rental income-producing property, it does seem a little bit different in this particular case. And I am very familiar with the property as well and live in the neighborhood, and it is definitely doesn't look like there's a large attempt there to make the current conditions, even if it is the yard or the surroundings or the feeling of the property, at least feel that they are part of a neighborhood which is in a historic neighborhood, which is always in the process of revitalizing in a positive way. So I understand what Mr. Trachtenberg is saying. This is a little bit tricky. So thank you for answering my questions.
Well, I would say to that also, it's not a typical absolute. It's actually the absolute opposite of absentee landlord because he lives there. Now, I understand the condition of the property. I do drive by there once in a while, but it starts with the roof. And once the roof is dried in, then the structure doesn't do demolition by neglect. And then down the road, it saves the actual structure, which is our primary. Number one, it's what's in front of us. Number two, it's our primary goals is keep the structure standing as a contributing structure. So I think it's great to start by saving the roof, and then I'm for the hardship.
So just to clarify, Ms. Beckham, you say you live at the property. Are you in the unit that has all of the stuff in the front that I'm seeing in these pictures here with the plants and the?
No.
No. I want to ask staff, when you were doing your report on this application, did you find anything else within the building or how the property was being used that didn't adhere to the neighborhood standards?
Could you rephrase the question, please?
I'm asking staff, when you were doing your assessment or analysis, is there anything else that you found on the site that doesn't adhere to neighborhood standards or?
No, this staff report was based solely on the request for the tile shingles instead of the concrete.
Right, but usually when the board,
wouldn't this be a property, a little Havana house?
Right. I mean, basically, maybe Mr. Adams, you can touch base here on this. As you're looking at these images of the things that are happening, I mean, this is an opportunity to clean up the neighborhood best we can, to remove things that are obviously not or should not be there. Yes. And maybe there's an opportunity to improve on something at this juncture, because it is one of the worst frontages along our neighborhood's main corridor.
Mm-hmm. I can certainly, there may very well be outstanding violations on it. I can certainly check with the code department and see if there are, and if there aren't, then I'm sure they'll take a drive past and have a look.
Right, because I think this is an opportunity to improve on, like I say, one of the worst frontages on the avenue. So when I saw this coming up today, I was a little bit happy to have this, be able to have this conversation, because I don't know how else to improve that strip other than one at a time. And I think I would be amenable to maybe helping out with the hardship conversation if there was a way to improve elsewhere on the property to bring it, the rest of it to what the neighborhood is asking for.
I have a question for the applicant. Well, there's an applicant name called Roger McKenzie on this.
That's me.
On this application. Who is Roger McKenzie? Okay.
Yeah, I'm the
So-
son.
My son.
Okay. So, Mr. Mackenzie and Miss Beecham, I have feelings on both sides of this fence. I am also, just like Mr. Ryan, a landlord and an owner of historic property. And as Mr. Ryan said, it's not as simple a situation as just raising the rent whenever you want and get more money to pay for stuff. It's more complicated than that. But with that being said, I also sympathize with Mr. Trachtenberg's statements, where the property itself seems to have not been kept at the optimal level as could have been done without heavy expense. So Mr. Mackenzie and Ms. Beecham, you need to think about this seriously now, because you're at a point now where your roof is damaged and the very integrity of the structure is now being threatened. But now you need to look at deeply at how you've been dealing with that property over the years. How have you been maintaining the property? How have you been presenting this property to the neighborhood and the tenants to then be able to increase your rent? Have you been maybe not trying to say anything, but have you been maybe a little lackadaisical on how you can treat this property that's in a historic neighborhood? So I have feelings on both sides of the fence, but I think in this case, you may be witnessing a situation where over the years, by not putting in that optimal effort that could have been done even without heavy expense, now that the roof is falling in on you, it has come around now to where the point now you can't increase your rent because of this situation. So you need to think deeply about how you're treating that property and how you can even look into the future of how that property can become more of an income generator for you, so you can avoid problems like this and make people like us on this board have appreciation and respect for your property. Do you understand what I'm saying, Mr. Mackenzie and Ms. Beecham?
Yes.
This is very serious. This is very serious. It's
If
you're in
I
a
could-
historic neighborhood, and this is now a chance where things are now coming down on you, and you really have to think about this very carefully. Okay. I haven't decided as yet, but I really needed to say that to you both.
Thank you.
So can I answer or can I speak? If you don't mind.
May, yes.
Yes. So I'm the younger son, trying to address those concerns as stated, as far as making the property look as nice as it can be. As Mr. Trachtenberg said, it's probably one of the not nicest looking property on that street. I would agree. And I am trying to change that. And as someone said, it starts with the roof. Also, there are additional things.
I would disagree. Sorry to interrupt, but I would disagree. To make the property have that optimal, not only appearance, just like cosmetic appearance, but actually to perform as a good property within the neighborhood. It doesn't start with the roof. The roof is on you now because it's threatening the structural integrity. But it's not about the roof. You can take care of the property even before the roof problem even began.
I understand.
So I disagree when you say it starts with the roof.
I understand. I mean, from a financial standpoint.
Yeah, even financially, it didn't start with the roof. You could do other things before the roof, financially, to make the property perform better.
You're right.
Yes. Yeah.
I have a question for staff. If we were to accept the hardship condition, are there any conditions you would like to put on a possible motion?
I have emailed the code department to see if there are any outstanding violations. I don't know if there are or not at the moment. A condition could be that if there are any outstanding violation, that all of these are addressed. And I don't know, a question for the city attorney would be, is it possible in cases like this to put a condition on that we recognise there's a financial hardship now based on the evidence you've submitted, We will approve the requested asphalt shingles on the condition that the next time the roof needs replaced, it is a concrete tile. Number one, can a board impose that condition? And number two, if the property is sold, would that condition carry with it? Or number three, even if it didn't carry with it, assuming in the future a new owner come in for a new roof, then when staff did their research into the background, they would at least see that condition and be able to say, well, this was granted a hardship in the past. The board said at the time that this would only be a one-off on the condition that the original roof material is replaced in the future. Can the board do that?
I think that it's possible to do because it's related to this application. However, there may be some unintended consequences to that. For example, if it does change ownership and that owner has a viable economic hardship that they would like to plead to the board, that condition may stand in the way. Also, it doesn't seem, what if the guidelines for the neighborhood have changed and now asphalt shingles are allowed? However, we have this condition in there that it's not going to be allowed for the next one. In addition, if it's not in compliance with the guidelines, next time they come in and if this request is made, it's not going to be in compliance. So it's always going to come before this board. So I don't even know that it's necessary to put in there. Is it possible? Yes, but just have those unintended consequences in mind. And if it's desirable to add that sort of condition, I would recommend that it be specifically tailored, unless the guidelines are modified to provide for asphalt shingles, or it changes ownership and the new owner has a viable economic hardship. Something along those lines.
It may be simpler just to make sure that should this come back again in the future for a new roof, the background is clearly explained. And should it be the same owner that comes forward in 7 or 8 years asking for asphalt shingles again, if the background says they were given an economic hardship 8 years ago, then the board would be within the right to say, well, you've had 8 years, you knew what was going to happen the next time you come in. It sounds as if it would be better to just not put that as a condition, but have that in the background record.
When you say background record, what do you mean?
Well, when staff does an analysis, there's a section in there about the background of the property, previous applications. So it sounds as if it may be simpler to just make sure that's included in any future application, and the board can see that an economic hardship has already been granted.
Right, because we'll have access to this resolution so we can see the history.
Okay, and I should add to the board that this is as you know, this is commonly recurring request within the Palm Grove neighbourhood. The residents seem to be firmly split down the middle between those that feel asphalt shingles should be allowed to protect the building and those that feel no, they shouldn't, to restore the historic character of the neighbourhood. It may be something that we want to address in the guidelines. It may be something that we want to come up with a clear policy or direction on that we can maybe work with the property owners. But the neighbourhood does, the ones that I've spoken to do seem to be firmly split down the middle on what they feel they would like to see here.
Mr. Chair, I have a suggestion. When they talk about what we're in effect doing is granting a nonconformity with the guidelines of this historic district. And what we're concerned with is that this nonconformity be grandfathered in much longer than it should be. And usually the trigger of when you lose a nonconformity or the grandfathering is when you're get a permit to do more than 50% of the value. So maybe we could restrict it to that it's allowed to stay there until this owner or any subsequent owner does more than 50% of the value of the structure. And then it would have to conform with the guidelines for roofing, whatever they may be when the permit is applied for.
The issue with that might be that it limits the incentivization of improvement on the property. No.
Well, I think
basically,
I agree with Hugh that the most important thing right now is to protect this building from further neglect and further deterioration, and this will allow for that. But it will also create a scenario that they can maintain the building as they have it. But I think your argument is if they need to fix the building up more than the 50%, they won't do it to stay within that guideline.
That's
and when
right.
you think of the $15,000 difference one way or another, if someone's going to invest money to fix this building up substantially, they would also see the benefit and the value of bringing the building up to a higher, more in higher standards of what the historic district has. And if not, there's a lot of under 50% value that would go a long way in improving this building.
well, for me, I can't seem to get past the idea that this folio is bringing the neighborhood down dramatically all around it. Every aspect of the neighborhood, everybody's investing in their properties around it. There are starter homes that people are investing in, going through the proper protocols to update their homes. There are multifamilies right up the street. Somebody put in a lot of money about 3 blocks away to renovate this beautiful compound of 6 buildings. And this is one that's actually bringing down the whole entire neighborhood. So I've watched it happen over the last 5 years.
Mr. Trachtenberg, let me ask you. Sorry.
So my question back to you my question back to you in this conversation is that, well, if they're able to, let's say, save $15,000 on a roof, which again is just infrastructurally, able to hold the structure in place and keep it safe. Is there ways that maybe that $15,000 that they're saving can be put back into the building so that then the landlords could actually improve the property and increase the rents and then create that cycle that historic neighborhoods are trying to do, rather than just sort of putting a Band-Aid on top and saving $15,000 and then going home? Maybe there's a way that we can help that $15,000 go back into the rest of the building. Just a thought.
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple fixing up.
Ryan, I think you're breaking up. Is it just me or Ryan, you're breaking up?
Am I? All right. Am I back?
Yeah.
Any better?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
The people doing the investing and buying the starter homes, they're not the ones that have any economic hardship because they've got the means. And I'm looking at the picture, the one I could find, the Google Street View that the city included, and on that view, I don't know. You tell me, because you see it all the time. Other than the car parked on the grass, the main problem is the roof, because it's got a tarp on it, and it's probably been on there a long time. Everything else, it's not Better Homes and Gardens, but is it a code violation? The parking on the swale and it's not how I would maintain a place, but is it, what's the major violation, or how is the property bringing down the neighborhood, and is that really our business, when it comes for a roof?
I think generally we want to make sure that the neighborhoods, just as a friendly, neighborly assistance to what everybody else is doing and going through the proper protocols, that things are getting improved, landscaping is done properly, tenants or people who are living there aren't, putting I guess what that is, a grill and things outside of the right of way, which is, yes, it's a code violation, but obviously things like stucco, paint, doors, windows, that's why I was asking staff what they would recommend, but I'm just looking at it now, and it's just, there's a lot of little things that could maybe be updated or fixed, with the savings of $15,000 that will help, elevate not only the neighborhood, but also the rent rates for the landlord.
I think from staff, there would always be a recommendation to maintain and appropriately repair a property. Whether, the enforcement of that does come down to code though, not really staff. And I think the same thing, parking on the swale and the grills in the front yard, certainly staff would recommend against all of that. But ultimately it would come down to code to enforce. So unfortunately, we are not in the position of being able to tell people what, you must replace your windows, you must replace your door, unless it becomes obviously unsightly or dangerous, then it's obviously a code issue. But it would show some good faith from the applicant if they agreed to start clearing up the front yards, preventing the parking on the front swales, and moving ahead with other required repairs, as I believe they have intended that is what they want to do. So maybe they could agree to clearing up the front yards and moving ahead with other repairs, but I don't think it's something that we could enforce.
Well, maybe that goes back then to Mr. McKenzie, that you said you were stepping in, and I understood when you were saying the first step being the roof. Maybe what you meant to say was that the first step in your process right now is fixing the roof. And as you fix the roof, what your next steps might be. And I guess my question for you is okay, let's say you get granted this hardship and you save $15,000. What are your next steps to improve the property?
My next immediate step would want to be the replacement of the windows, which are jalousie windows. They're not efficient, etc. And I don't know if they would be approved based on when I initially requested this special appropriateness, with speaking with someone, I forget what floor it's on, they told me to actually do the roof separate than adding it in with this one, because I actually wanted to get the approval for both simultaneously, even though I wouldn't be able to afford it just as yet. But the roof is in dire need, and then by saving the funds of of the tile to shingle, the next step would be for the windows and painting of the property, more so.
And what kind of timeline were you planning for that?
3 months.
You mean as far as the windows?
Yeah.
Within the next 12 months after the completion of the roof, because this roof actually was initially submitted for permit by a contractor almost a year prior, and it was denied. And the roofer, he didn't know how to go about doing the special, so it took me a while to gather how to go about it. So a lot of time has been passed since the initial roof permit was submitted and denied, and here we are today. So probably what I'm saying is that had the roof been done a year ago, we might be already with new impact windows. So that's the idea. And as far as financially, we have to do the roof first, because of course it is needed, and then the windows will be the next idea. I was thinking in my humble eyes of beautification, and then along with painting, of course, and cleaning up the property, the grass, the landscape.
So,
but as far as from a visible view, because we also had other
Ryan, you go ahead.
Issues.
Mr. Ryan, you can go ahead.
We also had plumbing issues. It is 1956, so recently I did have to undertake changing the cast iron pipes, which is not a cheap thing, on one of the buildings. That was several thousands of dollars. That's either here and there. It's not part of this, but it is an older building, as we all know. So there are unforeseen problems that we come across. I've learned, I'm a newer landlord. My mother was kind of manager. I'm kind of stepping in, taking it over. And I see it as an eyesore personally. And I'm trying to change that. So that's the intent, and that's the goal.
Sir, if I can, you came in here for the roof, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And this discussion, in my opinion, it's like for people, because people come in here for one thing, and you start throwing $100,000 worth of improvements on them. That's why they don't want to do it. We tell people in districts and people that are going to designate, okay, it doesn't mean you have to do it all now. You're grandfathered in until the time comes up. I'm a property owner in a historic district. I happen to own the poster child for the Riverview Historic District, but I did it beforehand, before it was a district. Now that it's a district, I don't expect everyone to instantly, they don't have the means. They don't have the means to do all of these improvements. And I sure don't expect them to, because it's a free country and the rules are set. We shouldn't be throwing all of these requirements at these people when they came in for, at least in my opinion, one vote. When they came in for the roof, everything else, if you keep it up and keep the property in good shape, that's a code issue. That's between you and code. But as far as redoing the whole thing, that's not, I mean, as an owner of a historic building, I don't see it that way at all, because I own buildings and because I believe that this roof, the shingle roof, like I first said, the life expectancy of these asphalt shingles is 15, 20 years. And this one, maybe less, because it has a low pitch, because it originally had a concrete tile roof. And the low pitch, they leak sooner because it doesn't drain off as well. So this isn't forever. This is just for the time being. And I just don't think, I think that throwing all this stuff at them, people watching, people, seeing it other times, is what they talk about when they say never designate your house or your neighborhood. That's just my opinion.
I think I started off by saying that we do not have the authority to tell property owners to change things. I do think it's a reasonable request to ask how they will go through the ongoing maintenance of their property if they're requesting an economic hardship, though. Because if someone requests an economic hardship and says, I'm going to save $15,000 and put an inappropriate roof covering on, and that is it, then, is that, I think it should be considered that they have plans in the future to continue working on the property. And I think the applicant has confirmed that is their intent. And I think that's what we want to see, ongoing maintenance and repair and improvements for everybody's benefit. I think, Amber, you wanted to say something?
Yes, thank you. Just to add to the two comments before mine, the application before the board is a roof replacement, and taking into consideration the economic hardship request. So any conditions need to be reasonably related to the application that's in front of the board. So I did just want to remind the board of that.
So Amber, let me ask you a question in that regard. If we're saving the landlord $15,000, and yes, we're not trying to force them to do anything outside of the roof, but there are savings attributed to that roof, just like any credits that you would get for transfer of density or something like that. Is there a way that there's a condition that that money that's being saved over time would be put back into the property?
Well, there are certain criteria for the economic hardship. So if they meet it, they meet it. If they don't meet it, then, arguably they wouldn't have any money to put in right now, because if they're falling under the economic hardship exemption, it means they have an economic hardship. So we can't say, well, we're saving you, this $15,000, you have to take that and put it towards something else. they're saying that they don't have it.
That was the reason why I asked at the beginning of the opening of questions for us if the documentation that's required to be sent in for economic hardship is the responsibility of staff or the board. Because right now, sitting here, I saw the documents that came in about their income and so on and so forth. Is that something that we should determine each case? I think we should get to the point where the documentation required for economic hardship is reviewed by staff probably, and then giving a yay or nay based upon documentation. This is now the third or fourth time now we're going off of how we feel. And is there not a standard with documentation that says yay or nay because of X, Y, Z, they do receive this, or because of X, Y, or ABC, they don't receive this? Are we going off of what we perceive, or is there a documentational reality with mathematical determination, yes or no?
The only mathematical determination is whether or not they've submitted the required documentation. It's up to the board and not staff to determine whether or not that meets the board's expectations for economic hardship.
Okay. So are we now talk when we go to make a motion, are we going over the documentation that they have submitted to determine this? Are we as a board, are we going to do, is that our next step in this? Or are we going to make a motion based upon
it was read into it would be based on what was read into the record by staff.
Okay.
One of the things to consider is this, you know, this is not an easy thing to determine. I mean, there are so many other, you know, income could be coming from elsewhere, other rented properties. You know, simply because someone is elderly and retired doesn't necessarily mean to say they don't have income coming from elsewhere. It may very well be in some cases where someone is elderly and is in a very low fixed income and they really cannot afford the repairs. The applicants are only required to submit the information as requested in Chapter 23. If there's other information that the board feel may be helpful in determining these cases, maybe there's an option to change Chapter 23 to broaden the scope of the information that is actually submitted. You know, that may be one option which could help determine these cases. If there's other items the board feel would be useful to help make the determination. Because as it is, the only things that are requested are the date of purchase and the purchase price, the assessed value for the last 3 years, the property taxes for the last 3 years, any recent appraisals, any recent listings, a profit and loss statement for businesses, and if any adaptive reuse has been considered. So that's really the only information that we request, although we do say to applicants, please submit anything else that you think is going to help determine your case. But maybe there is a need to request more detailed information and maybe request an amendment to Chapter 22.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Campbell. I'll go after you.
Well, I was about to say, in this case, I think the applicants are honest and are experiencing or not having the ability to complete the $15,000 shortfall for the stone tile roof. And I do believe Mr. McKenzie honestly wants to improve his mother's property. So I was about to make a motion, but go ahead, Mr. Collins.
No, I was just going to basically follow up and say that this is incredibly tricky, right? And it seems to me the issue that's before us is for the roof. And if as the applicants, you're saying that you cannot afford, because you're asking for a change of what, and you're here, and you're really saying literally, we cannot afford to do this roof tile. But then simultaneously also, I know that maybe within a certain period of time, you want to fix up the entire rest of the property, it sounds like, and continue moving forward. And that's a great thing. But this is specifically an economic hardship. not an economic hardship in the sense of, well, it's a lot less expensive for us to do this than this. So for me, it's really relies, in this case, especially based on the documentation that Mr. Adams just mentioned that has to be provided to the city, is not necessarily that same documentation. It has to come from the applicant themselves. If this is truly an economic hardship in that case, then, you know, I would rely on that testimony, because the last thing we would want to do, or I would want to do personally, is put somebody in a position where they couldn't get a roof on their residence when rain is coming in. But that is different than, well, it's a lot, you know, more affordable at this particular moment in time to do X versus Y. And so those are my thoughts at this time. And it sounds like we'll be going based on the testimony that's been provided by the applicants. So thank you.
And the documentation read into the record. Mr. Campbell, you had a motion you wanted to make?
Yes. I would like to make a motion to approve a special certificate of appropriateness for alterations to a contributing property located at approximately 7501 Northeast 4th Court, Miami, Florida, 33138 within the Palm Grove Historic District.
Second.
Did you want to mention?
Did I miss anything?
Did you want to base your motion on the condition of the economic hardship demonstrated in the documentation?
Yes, based upon the economic hardship demonstrated in documentation, I have come to this analysis to make this motion.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any discussion on the motion?
Yes, I'd like to just add a point on the record, because, you know, these are going to come up before us a lot, and I've definitely sided with the homeowners' hardships in the past, specifically ones that have shown, you know, intention to update their property. I'm actually going to take Mr. McKenzie at his word to say that his intention is to, you know, over the next year to improve the property and to make it a viable part of the community and not an eyesore. So with that said, I will vote in tandem with the rest of the board.
Well, we'll see. Any other discussion on the motion? Now, can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Campbell,
Yes.
Mr. Ryan,
Yes.
Mr. Colley,
Yes.
Ms. Galvez Tudros,
Yes.
Ms. Odell,
Yes.
Mr. Prieto y Munoz,
Yes.
Mr. Trachtenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Tragash,
Yes.
and Dr. Hopper.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously, and this decision is final unless appealed to hearing boards within 15 days.
Thank you very much and good luck.
Thank you all very
Thank you.
much.
Yeah, can I say one thing before we go on to the next one? Mr. Campbell, I think we were talking about, or you were mentioning about how this cannot go to us and just be dealt with administratively. I think the design of this is for us as fellow citizens, as fellow residents, to hear it out in the open, transparency, you know, about what the case is, and for us as a board to make the judgment on that. I think that's the intention, as opposed to just going to 4th floor Riverside Center.
I understand.
Yeah.
And I think to follow up on that, I think it's a really good opportunity for us to be able to discuss and educate the owners on opportunities for improving and, you know, ideas for their properties to help the longevity of the neighborhood. So I think it's actually helpful, this process. I know it's a little bit daunting to go through, but I think it's great to hear Mr. McKenzie say what he's planning on doing, and nice to visualize his plan and watch it come to fruition.
True.
Okay, number 3.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you, everyone.
Thank you.
You all. Thanks.
File ID 7899, a resolution of the Miami Historic and Environmental Preservation Board pursuant to Section 23-6.24 of the City Code of Ordinances, approving or denying a special certificate of appropriateness for alterations to a contributing property located approximately at 930 Southwest 2nd Street, Miami, Florida 33130, within the Riverview Historic District.
Is the applicant present?
Yes, he is.
Mr. Porosoff. And give your name and address for the record, please.
Arthur David Porosoff.
Address? Yes, I'm at 2640 South Bayshore Drive, Suite 301, Miami, Florida 33133. My name is Juan E. Berry.
Are you the applicant?
Which
one is the applicant?
She can swear me in. I don't think I did it at the beginning, so I swear to tell the truth. And what else is there? Is there a line that?
Are we listening to Mr. Porosoff or someone else?
I would like to clarify to the board that Arthur Porosoff is the applicant, and we also have the architect on with us, which is Juan Berry.
Okay. So, Mr. Porosoff, you were going to give us your address.
Yes, my business address is 1200 Brickell, Suite 680, Miami, Florida 33131.
Okay. And I believe the Mr. Berry needed to be sworn in case we need to talk to him later.
Mr. Berry to be sworn in now?
Yes. I swear the truth. She's
I'm the notary, Patricia Carrasco. The notary number is, give me 1 second.
Okay. Madam Notary, would you swear in Mr. Berry?
Yes. My Florida commissioner is GG 203572, and the expiration date is April 6, 2022.
Thank you. And could you swear in Mr. Berry?
This is Mr. Juan Berry. According with his document, he is a registered architect.
No, we want him to tell the truth. Can you ask him to?
Oh, you need to ask me if I'm going to tell the truth.
Are you going to tell the truth? Only the truth is
The whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Okay, now we're going to start with the staff report and then we'll come back to you. So please mute your microphones.
Okay, no problem. Go ahead.
Reading the staff report onto the record. The subject property is a contributing property of 5 multi-residential structures within the Riverview Historic District, constructed in 1946. Pursuant to Goal LU 2.3 and 2.4 of Miami Neighborhoods, Comprehensive Plan and City will preserve and protect the heritage of City of Miami through the identification, evaluation, rehabilitation, adaptive reuse, restoration, and public awareness of Miami's historic and archaeological resources. The applicant's request for approval of alterations to a contributing property of 5 multi-residential structures is in accordance with the comprehensive plan of Chapter 23 of the City of Miami Ordinances and the Secretary of Interior Standards and Preservation Office Historic District Guidelines. From the analysis, the property's 5 multi-residential structures were built in 1946 in the architectural style of mid-century modern. The historic tax card and photographs documents and illustrates the original metal windows and the function of a pair of double, regular double, and single casement windows. The applicant is requesting to replace all existing windows and exterior doors with new impact windows and exterior doors for safety, security, and meet egress requirements, Miami-Dade County Building Code and City of Miami standards. The window and door frame colors are to be in clear anodized finish with clear glass, manufactured by Eco Windows Systems, and include E500 outswing casement, fixed windows, and French door with side lights. The following of the City of Miami Historic Design Guidelines, HEB staff has reviewed the door replacement options to be appropriate, but the proposed window functions not to be inappropriate. A replacement scheme. The applicant proposes large single casement windows with fixed muntins to provide a faux double casement appearance and provide egress to all bedrooms and living room areas. According to Florida Building Code, only bedrooms are required to provide a means of egress. If the applicant wishes to put egress type windows in all locations, the building department does not object. According to the City of Miami Historic Design Guidelines, HEP staff can only approve window replacements of the same configuration, style, and functions. Therefore, HEP board review and approval is required. HEP staff have provided 2 window analysis reports and 1 price-reducing option available to the applicant to consider when revising the proposed replacement scheme. Pages from the window analysis report are presented to the HEP board as Exhibit A. The applicant has made corrections to the proposed window replacement scheme to match the original configuration, but not the original function. HEP staff has confirmed with the City of Miami Building Department's Quality Control Manager and Miami-Dade County Department of Regulatory and Economic Resources 3 alternative methods that the applicant can search and explore to provide historic appropriate windows options to provide egress and correct aesthetics. Option 1, the applicant can choose an NOA within the Miami-Dade County Department. Option 2, the applicant can select an NOA from the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation. Option 3, the applicant can apply for a window NOA for a one-time approval through the Miami-Dade County Department of Regulatory and Economic Resources. The applicant has submitted a notice written in drawing A7, which states all approved producers of impact casement windows in Miami-Dade County, such as ESW, PGT, Mr. Glass, and Eco Windows, produce double casement windows with a central mullion with a minimum width of 37 inches. The notice also includes the following statement. Mr. Glass, the only supplier that produces or has a Miami-Dade County product approval for 37-inch casement windows, advises against the production due to partial operation and odd proportion. The applicant has stated there are currently no available double casement windows without a central mullion with a Miami-Dade NOA to meet egress requirement. The applicant has also confirmed there are available double casement with a central mullion with a Miami-Dade NOA, but therefore does not meet egress requirement and contains an odd proportion. Their argument is the following. The structures would retain a consistent window appearance if a mixture of double casement windows with a central mullion for the living rooms and large casement windows for the bedrooms were to be installed. The applicant would like to move forward with the proposed large single casement windows for a faux pair of double casement window appearance to complete the renovation project and provide housing in Little Havana in a timely manner. HEP staff recognize the difficulty in locating double casement windows without a central mullion and are aware of the alternative methods can be costly and would require an extensive amount of time. The applicant has attempted to an historic windows configuration, but not in function. City of Miami Code of Ordinances, Chapter 23, Historic Windows. Historic preservation requires issuance of a COA. The Secretary of the Interior Standards for the Treatment of Historic Properties Guidelines for Rehabilitation recommends the following. 1. Replacement of all the components in a glazing system if they have failed because of faulty design or materials that have deteriorated with new material and will improve the window performance without noticeable changing the historic appearance. And number 2, installing the impact-resistant glazing when necessary for security that is compatible with the historic windows and does not damage them or negatively impact their character. The proposed windows and exterior door replacement scheme is partially consistent with Riverview Historic District in terms of configuration and color. However, it is not compatible in terms of original historic windows functions, which are pair of double, regular double, and single casement functions. The findings are partially inconsistent. From the conclusions, the application has partially demonstrated compliance with Chapter 23, entitled Historic Preservation of City of Miami Code of Ordinances and Secretary of Interior Standards. Staff finds the request partially complies with all applicable criteria and finds that the request for the special certificate of appropriateness for alteration does partially adversely affect the historic, architectural, or aesthetic character of the subject structure's aesthetic interest historic district. The recommendation. Pursuant to Section 23-6.2 of the City of Miami Code of Ordinances, as amended with the Secretary of Interior Standards, the Preservation Office recommends approval with conditions of special certificate of appropriateness. 1. The site shall be developed in accordance with the plans as prepared by Berry Design Studio, submitted as part of the application, PZ 208422. The plans are deemed incorporated by reference herein. Number 2, windows shall resemble the historic windows in appearance and operation. Number 3, all glass to be clear and low E. Number 4, the applicant shall comply with all applicable requirements of the Miami 21 Code and Chapter 23, Chapter 17, and City of Miami Code of Ordinances. Number 5, the applicant shall comply with the requirements of all departments, agencies as part of the City of Miami building permit submittal process.
Thank you. Does the applicant have anything to add to the staff report? Mr. Porasop?
Good evening.
Mr. Porasop first, I'd like to hear from you.
What was your question?
The recommendation?
Is there anything Mr. Porasop would like to add to the staff report?
As long as the board's recommending an approval, I'm okay with it. Is that what you guys said? I apologize, my internet's a little slow, so it's been choppy. I didn't catch every word.
Did you get the 5 conditions?
I believe we did, yeah.
Okay.
Just to clarify here, the conditions were that the windows shall resemble the historic windows in appearance and operation. My understanding is that the discussion of this item is coming down to the fact that they will not resemble the existing windows with regard to operation. Therefore, my understanding is that you don't necessarily agree with the staff conditions because you would like approval for the windows that you have proposed. Is that correct?
I believe it is. I cannot hear you well. Give me 1 second.
If I can just explain to the board what the issue is here. A number of these windows are double casement windows. In other words, they operate as normal casements. The applicants are saying the only available options for them are either one larger window that resembles a double casement, so effectively the entire 2 sections opens, or the only other option available is a double casement with a central mullion, which operates like a regular casement. However, the central mullion will not look correct, and the central mullion does not necessarily meet egress requirements. So staff is not able to approve the large window, which is effectively one window looking like a double casement. And I think this is something that we need to discuss because I think this is potentially an issue that could come up more. And that is really what this boils down to. Staff are really fine with the overall look of the windows. The problem is they do not operate the same as the original windows. So once the proposed windows are open, they will of course look very different from what was there. While closed, they will pretty much look exactly like what was there. And that's the sort of crux of the issue here.
Are these buildings air conditioned?
They have central AC in them, correct?
Then the windows probably won't be open too much.
I don't think so.
Was there any public comment on this issue?
There's also issue of, may I? There's an issue besides the egress issue. There's an issue of proportion, okay? The windows that are there, the double casements, they have a frame that could not be wider than perhaps an inch. The casements, the double casements distant have 2 panes of glass. They're 37 inches, has 2 panes of glass. Each pane is 4 inches wide. Plus you have also a central mullion that's 2 inches, drastically different to the windows that are there right now. And basically what you have is the panes of glass that are basically 9 inches wide, which is not the condition that's there right now. And we opted not to go that way because it just drastically changes the appearance of this building. Besides the fact that the window doesn't even operate open. That's why there's many manufacturers that do not make this window because nobody orders the window. It's at the end of the day, it's an ugly window. And this is why everybody, when they're down to 37 inches or 30, they opt for a single casement, which works better. So this is the reason why we decided, let's go with single casements, but let's use mittens and try to maintain heights and so on and so forth. The other window, I'm telling you, if you sit down and I did the math here, you get a pane of glass at 9 inches. And if you look at the historical pictures, windows do not look like that at all. So this is the reason that we opted in the direction that we took on the design and the proposal. So, I mean, if the board wants to approve it, but I just can't use the double. I don't think we should use the double casements because they're not going to work aesthetically. Besides the fact that they don't work for egress either. So,
Right.
please take that into consideration.
Sure. Let me ask staff, was there any public comment on this item?
No, there was not.
Okay, then I'll close the public hearing and open up to the board for questions or comments.
I think I agree with Mr. Berry that
Of course.
the aesthetical appearance of the double casement will throw off the historic appearance of the structures.
And you get the same effect with mountains. And you can have them operate as for egress. Any other questions or comments? Are we ready for a motion?
Well, I have a question. When staff recommended approval with conditions, the condition would be, to me, it's looking like it's not an approval, but number 2 seems to be the one, the approval that staff gave with conditions. Number 2 seems to be the ultimate condition. Am I correct? Where we're trying to determine the choice of the 2 different windows.
Number two would require the new windows to operate exactly the same as the existing windows. If you're going to approve the applicant's request, you would approve it with conditions, but not condition number 2. You would just approve the other 3. Condition number 2 would not come into it.
How about appearance?
The windows, I mean, Isabel, please chime in here, but the proposed windows do look very much similar to the windows that are there. Our issue
No,
was...
I mean in the condition. Can we keep the condition that windows shall resemble the historic windows in appearance?
Yes.
And leave off and operation?
Yes.
Okay.
And if I may, to add comments in a staff review, we are approving with conditions of appearance, yes, and staff cannot approve at a staff level a different function. So that is why we're presenting it to the board at this time.
Right. Thank you for that clarification. Who has a motion?
I'll read it. I would like to make a motion to approve a special certificate of appropriateness for alterations to a contributing property located approximately at 930 Southwest 2nd Street, Miami, Florida, 33130, within the Riverview Historic District. Based upon staff approval with conditions as read by staff, with condition number 2 being altered to the windows shall resemble historic windows in appearance, and scratch the operation feature of recommendation number 2. So we'll only recommendation number 2 will only read windows shall resemble historic windows in appearance only.
Is there a second?
A second.
Any discussion on the motion? Thank you, Ms. Odell. No discussion on the motion? And can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Campbell,
Yes.
Ms. Odell,
Yes.
Mr. Colley,
Yes.
Ms. Galvez Duros,
Me? Yes.
Mr. Prieto y Munoz,
Sorry. Yes. Yes.
Mr. Ryan,
Yes.
Mr. Trachtenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Tragash,
Yes.
Dr. Hopper.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously, and this decision is final unless appealed to hearing boards within 15 days.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're on to number 4.
File ID 7901, a resolution of the Miami Historic and Environmental Preservation Board pursuant to Section 23-6.24 of the City Code of Ordinances, approving or denying a special certificate of appropriateness for an addition, alterations, and site improvements to a non-contributing property located approximately at 800 Northeast 72nd Street, Miami, Florida 33138, within the Bayside Historic District.
And is the applicant present?
Yes.
Could you please give your name and address for the record?
Sorry. Rebecca Saberi, Northeast 72nd Street, Miami, Florida 33138.
I'm sorry, what's your house number on 72nd Street?
800.
Thank you. We'll start with the staff report.
Analysis. The existing structure is a post-war style house built in 1955 and located at Northeast 72nd Street in the Bayside Historic District. Plans propose a one-story addition, alterations, and site improvements to the residential property. Even though this property is listed as non-contributing, preservation staff believes because of its date of construction and post-war style that is seen in Bayside, the facades facing the right-of-way should not be completely altered. The property qualifies for a change of status from non-contributing to contributing. As such, large-scale alterations to the property should not occur. The proposed alterations do not appear to be significant enough to prohibit a change to contributing status in the future and are in line with the historic design guidelines. The applicant is applying to add a one-story addition to the southwest of the current structure. In addition, the applicant proposes to enclose the garage, construct a new deck in the rear, and place parking on the northeast side of the property. North elevation. The proposed north elevation depicts an increase in roof height for the garage and addition to match that of the residence, and the addition of a window to the north elevation of the westernmost facade of the property. West elevation. Plans for the proposed west elevation show the addition to the southwest extending from the rear of the existing garage. The addition continues south from the current structure. As this is a non-contributing property, staff does not find it necessary that the addition be set back 1 foot from the existing facade. The applicant proposes to replace the current garage door with 3 windows. These windows are as follows: a large picture window with a single casement window on either side, separated from the picture window by mullions, and on either side of this will be 2 square single casements. The addition has 1 casement window to the south of the west facade. South elevation. The proposed south elevation shows the new roof line of the addition. The south facade has 2 windows looking onto the rear yard. New steps will lead from the house to the proposed new wood deck. East elevation. The east elevation shows the addition has sliding glass doors that open onto steps into the backyard. To the north of these sliding doors on what is the existing structure is a new French glass door and another set of sliding glass doors. These doors exit to the proposed wood deck with built-in planter. Finally, the enclosure of the garage eliminates the requirement of a second parking space in the second or third layer. The applicant has worked with zoning for a solution, which is to create a parking space within the second layer on the northeast of the property. Recommendation. Pursuant to Section 23-6.2b4 of the City of Miami Code of Ordinances, as amended, and the Secretary of Interior Standards, the Preservation Office recommends approval with conditions of the Special Certificate of Appropriateness. 1. The site shall be developed in accordance with the plans prepared by Deforma Studio, consisting of 18 sheets submitted under PZ-20-8311. 2. All windows visible from the right-of-way shall be casement or fixed windows. 3. All windows shall be clear with the option of low-E coating. 4. The applicant shall comply with all applicable requirements of Chapter 17 and Chapter 23 of the City of Miami Code of Ordinances. 5. The applicant shall comply with the requirements of all applicable departments, agencies as part of the City of Miami building permit submittal process. Chair, I have a letter of recommendation from the Bayside Historic District. Should I read it into the record?
Yes, please.
second. Regarding the special certificate of appropriateness for 800 Northeast 72nd Street in the Bayside Historic District, we support the applicant's proposed addition and conversion. We find that the design plan works in harmony with the existing structure while respecting the important mid-century modern architecture of the home. Thank you, and kind regards, Shane Graber, President, Bayside Residents Association.
Thank you. Is there anything the applicant would like to add to the record? To the staff report?
Hi, I'm Rebecca. This is my husband, Kaveh. We're the owners of the property. We bought the property basically just to expand our family. We intend on living in it ourselves. And that's really all we have to add. If you have any questions, our architect is here. He just would need to be sworn in.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Is Christina Cusco your architect?
No, I'm the architect. Christina is the notary.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay, thank you. Was that all of the public comment we had on this item?
Yes.
Okay, then I'll close the public hearing and open up to the board for questions or comments. Or even a motion. Everyone seems lost in thought.
Well, I think from an architect's standpoint, it's a pretty straightforward conclusion of what you should do to add on to the site. I've actually been in this house back when it was for sale, and I remember it very distinctively because of the kitchen tile being, I think, black and white, right? It was this black and white kitchen tile. And I think I recall the reason for the large garage door setup was because the prior owner who built it was a landscape company or designer, and it fit his equipment in it somehow. So the whole house was designed around his lifestyle. I believe that was the case. Besides that, I think it's very straightforward, and the architect did a fine job continuing the roof line. Based on what I'm seeing from the landscaping, it seems like you took into account the blank wall that's on the the west side, and the west side will be properly shielded with plantings. I don't know if Chris agrees to that, but I think it looks okay.
Yeah, yeah, most definitely. Looks like very, very nice plants. Thank you very much.
Oh, which one of you wants to make a motion? Jordan.
All right. I guess that's a volunteer for Jordan. Dr. Hopper, I'd like to make a motion that, let me pull it up here, that item number 4, with property located at 800 Northeast 76th Street, be approved with the conditions as noted by staff.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Colley. Any discussion on the motion? No? Okay, let's have a roll call, please.
Mr. Trachtenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Colley,
Yes.
Mr. Campbell, Mr. Campbell,
I think he stepped away.
Ms. Galvez Dugo, Ms. Galvez Duros,
I said yes, sorry about that, bad connection.
Ms. Odell,
Yes.
Mr. Prieto y Munoz,
Yes.
Mr. Ryan,
Yes.
Mr. Tragash,
Yes.
Dr. Hopper.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously, and this decision is final unless appealed to hearing boards within 15 days.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to the board for a good meeting and for.
And Mr. Chair, before we adjourn, I have one discussion item I'd like to bring up.
Okay, well, I was just congratulating you for working so well on Zoom. Okay. So go ahead, Mr. Tragash.
So the item is
very unstable.
The internet connection, not your personality, right?
That's right. The issue I wanted to bring up is Dade Heritage Trust's lease with the city, that they've been at that property for 44 years. They're the oldest preservation group in Miami-Dade. And there was a vote where I think in 2016, approving a long-term lease so that they could stay there. And now the commission, I believe, is discussing selling the property and moving them. And I think it's important that our board look at that and see what we feel is appropriate.
Would a resolution be in order?
Yes, I think it would be. So,
bear in mind, it is a historic property, so any proposed alterations to the site would come to you. There was discussions about potentially moving the structure. If that was to be done, then obviously that would come to the board. Obviously, any changes would have to come to you, or is your concern more about?
My concern is we shouldn't be discussing it after it's sold. We should discuss it before it's sold. There was a voter referendum that that Dade Heritage Trust be there for a long term, and if they're selling it from them, yes, it would come before our board when they perhaps would like to relocate the building to another site. But I think we should bring it up before it's sold.
So you want to make a resolution in support of maintaining the lease on the property?
Correct. And actually what I'd like is if we could have some sort of report back on what's the history of the building, where it's at, and the Heritage Trust using it, and how the voters referendum would play into that.
So that was a request to staff, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, this is something you want brought to the next meeting, or you want information on this prior to the next meeting emailed to the members? Can I do that, Amber? If I get this information, can I email it to the board members if that's what they request, or must I bring it to the next meeting?
You can email it to them. Just remember to blind copy, because you don't want to start a conversation between board members if they reply all. Okay. But you're absolutely allowed to reach out to them independently, in addition to giving an update.
Okay, so would you like that information as soon as I have it for discussion at the next meeting?
Yes, that would be excellent.
Okay.
Thanks. Anything else? Is there a motion?
Again, just said one thing to that. Dade Heritage Trust, actually, the historic structure, Dr. Jackson's office, that was not the original location. However, the move itself was historic because it was moved by barge from essentially where Flagler and Biscayne are now. Before Bayfront, it was moved by barge to its current location. The fact we're having this discussion is depressing, but not surprising in today's current environment. But the move was historic as well.
Yes. And just curious, because I understand the financial interest in this, if the preservation Dade Heritage Trust would maybe be able to sell the rights as we're talking about an exchange, that the FAR rights, I'm using the wrong terminology, but that therefore it wouldn't be developed but they could sell it to someone that would then perhaps need those additional rights.
The only issue with the rights, the way it is worded now, is you can only sell the rights required to cover the work you want to do that you have a building permit for. So in other words, if someone has a historic building and they want to sell any of the development rights, they must have a building permit. So in other words, if you have $1 million worth of rights to sell, but your restoration is only going to cost 400,000, then you can only sell the 400,000. The reason for that was that people were selling rights in the past and not spending the money on the building. So now anything that you sell is tied to a building permit to ensure the money that is obtained is spent on the building. So I think that's one of the issues here, because, the building is in very good condition. What exactly would the rights be being sold?
Okay. And my understanding is Dade Heritage Trust is just a tenant. The city owns the property. But I was just trying to find a neutral solution. If the city owns the property, and I don't know if the city could sell those rights, it would take out the economic motivation to kick Dade Heritage Trust out.
Yeah, and there are two other considerations as well. Firstly, the size of it's not exactly a large site, so what exactly could be put on it? And the other consideration is that would not be an easy move for a building.
Right.
You're right, you're in downtown Miami, and to try and move a building through the air if you no longer have the ability to move it by road, that's a tricky one.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I look forward to hearing your progress and the report.
And while you're at it,
Sorry.
I'm not sure I'm able to ask this question directly, but maybe you could ask George Hernandez if he has found out what that thing is on top of Central Baptist Church, on top of the cupola.
Has something been added?
No, it's original, but no one knows what it is. It's not a cross. It's not a lightning rod. It's a very odd looking thing.
Okay, I'll reach out.
Thanks. Now, Hugh?
Oh, no, I was just gonna just put it on the record as far as the Dr. Jackson's office from turn of the last century that are preserved. Off the top of my head, I can think of Old Miami High in Southside Park, Fort Dallas. I mean, these go back to the 1800s, and that is the best use and the most functioning use of any old structure. That's like the greatest example of reusing an old wooden structure with so much history in it, because the rest of them are hardly used or open for field trips a couple times a year. So I think just to throw it out there doesn't make a difference as far as the discussion goes, because we're all in agreement, I would think, that's absolutely the best use for an old structure.
Right. Anybody else? Someone got a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Mr. Trachtenberg has seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. See you next month.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.